Hello, and welcome to All the Grief, a regular podcast for all those who have been touched by grief. We are your hosts. I am Rebecca Luttrell.
And I am Andrea Rebecca. We are two friends, a therapist, and a social scientist, both highly sensitive, fellow grievers, here to share our hearts as we talk about all the grief.
Good morning, Andrea.
Good morning, Rebecca.
How is your heart doing this morning?
My heart has been all over the place, to be honest. I did the 5-day wilderness journey and had so many unexpected gifts for me of being in the land, being in nature in that way, in such a raw way. And sort of the ancestral grief that came up that I was anticipating. And then some other things like around my mom that I wasn't expecting in that space. And it's been just like this slow unraveling since. So, it's been a week today since I came out of the canyon, and every day has been like the peel of an onion. And some of it has been really beautiful and some of it has been like shocking and painful. And for 3 days, I didn't leave my house. I just stayed in the house with the boys and the dog. And then, so it's just been a gradual integration back into the world. And it's interesting. Like I told you, I haven't been able to listen to podcasts or audiobooks or the news. I'm like a news junkie. I get up, I listen to my NPR while I'm like brushing my teeth and stuff. And I have not been able to do it. And so I've had to take real care of my heart. It feels like a big open wound, where it's like my husband at one point put his hand on my heart and he was like, you just need to protect this tender little heart. And I was like, you have no idea. It feels so raw and tender. And so I'm just being really careful with my heart right now. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
How is your heart?
My heart is excited. And listening to your story, I'm just like, I haven't really heard you unpack the trip and I'm waiting patiently. So my heart's being patient.
I know.
Waiting for you to integrate your experience and share with me. And I feel like, I don't know, I've just had some conversations recently that have felt really, really more in the realm of things that feel like pieces of our existence that can have so much wonder and magic with them. And so one is with a friend who, was diagnosed with a terminal cancer, but it's like, okay, well, this is what is. And then inside of that, how do we together just be in the wonder of being alive? And that's just felt so full in my heart. And then just having a lot of people that I've been talking to about co-facilitating different grief offerings and just people who have different gifts around working with grief. And it's just felt really magical right now to kind of be in that space. But that's where I am.
Oh, I'm so excited for you too. It's beautiful. And I know I've shared this with you in our offline world where we talk constantly, but just how beautiful it is, the space that you're holding for your friend and holding for yourself too, and being there for a friend who's going through this. It's like you're doing two things at once, which I think oftentimes when we're in a support role, especially in grief, we're having our own grieving experience while also supporting them. And I just, unsurprisingly, but I'm always so in awe of your ability to hold space for the people you love. And I'm so grateful to be one of them.
You are.
So today we have a guest on, Christine Passo, who is a 4-time certified support and transformation coach. She is dedicated to providing emotional healing guidance to midlife women. She offers validation and support for the losses that we've experienced in our lives, enlightenment to reveal the lessons that we've learned, and transform our thoughts to empower our purpose. Grief, she believes, although heartbreaking, may be our most significant tool in becoming the person we're meant to become. So I am so excited to welcome to All the Grief, Christine.
Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to be here with you, Andrea and Rebecca. Thank you so much. It's a privilege to speak about grief with the two of you.
Oh, we feel equally honored to have you with us. So Christine, how is your heart this morning?
Well, I'm about to drop a heart bomb. So my heart feels extra large, probably about 4 times the size right now. And it also feels like it has exited my body. I learned yesterday that a friend that I've had in my life since we were teenagers, so almost 40 years, We grew up together. We, told all the sad stories together. I befriended her sisters, 3 other sisters, that her oldest sister lost her 22-year-old son in a motorcycle accident.
Oh.
And I was at a loss for words. I couldn't even type via text. And it's so important for me to point out that this family, these women, have been through so much. It's like, I think we all have that one friend in our life who has just had a really, really hard life and a lot of trauma and a lot of heartbreak. And so because of that, my heart left my body when I learned of this. And I just would like to honor that he was 22 years old. His name was Bailey Thaxton. And, their youngest sister, whose name is Beth, she wrote something really beautiful. And I've actually cut it down just a little bit. And I would love to be able to share it with you because they are unfortunately so experienced in grief. And this is just a true tale for how grief is different every single time it hits. So she wrote, "The intensity of longing for more time, witnessing his mother in her grief, his brother now an only child. It's a lot to bear. I almost never struggle with regrets, but I am grappling with some now. What I will do with this regret, however, is live life differently. There's something in my family we call grief brain. It makes concentration difficult, decisions challenging, and wires being crossed in general. Nothing quite reminds you how fragile and unpredictable life is, like the sudden death of a young person. This is a reminder that will alter and shape my relationships moving forward." And, that really moved me because grief, no matter what, it transforms us. We look at life differently. And for everything that they have already been through, and for her to say these things, it's like, how do you offer support? Like, what else is there left to say? You know what I'm saying? And so my heart is very heavy, and I just want to honor them and what they're going through, and for Bailey and what he contributed in the life that he led.
Oh, Christine, thank you. Thank you for so openly sharing. Thank you for saying Bailey's name so that we can all hold his name and be part of carrying that memory that we didn't know him. We know what an impact just young people have on their communities and their families, and hold all of your friends, the 3 sisters, in our hearts.
Yes. Thank you.
Well, here we are. This is grief, and it can at times, like you said, be blindsiding. There are times when grief, Rebecca, is in this sort of equal parts celebration of the moment and present life and living with someone's death. We all are dying. This is definitely something that's going to happen to all of us. And then sometimes it comes out of nowhere. At 22 years, nobody is without a terminal diagnosis thinking about death in that way. So yeah, it's heartbreaking every single time, no matter how many times you go through it.
Yeah. And I think it's just so important to know, sometimes there just aren't things to say and we don't have words. And, we just had Rebecca Feingloss on, and she has a series of cards on her website. And one of them was, "I don't know what to say," as a grief card. And she was like, it's so nice to just have people admit that sometimes, because there are no words. There are losses so tragic, nothing's going to comfort. But yes, we will hold Bailey in our hearts as we're doing this episode, and just, ask our listeners to do that as well. And I'm holding you in my heart too.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you for being willing to be here in the midst of that. That's really raw. And I think we both know the feeling of, I think you described it so well, your heart sort of exiting your body, which I imagine a sort of protective mechanism for ourselves when we get into a moment of such great loss and heartbreak, that the feeling of outer-bodiedness, or oftentimes I'll hear from people in grief, they just don't remember certain parts of it, because I think there is only so much that we really can process and handle. And so sometimes that feeling of something just going external so that we can take that very next step, that there are some next steps that you have to, if you are working or you're a parent or a fur mom or, whatever it is, there just are responsibilities, or you need to take care of yourself and get some water. There are just one next step. And so I think we've all experienced that out of bodiness for sure.
It's so interesting. And this is the first time I thought this, and it was late last night. And I thought, so we have these sudden unexpected deaths. Some of them, maybe we do expect them due to illness, old age. But here, my friend is in absolute shock, and she will be, maybe for months. But yet she has to go and make all these decisions. And I thought to myself, why do we rush it so much? I mean, we're completely out of capacity, brain mode, heart mode to make any decision. It's possible that in 3 months and 6 months, you might have wanted something different. And, we're rushed. This is part of what society does, rush through to the services. And I know sometimes it is about preserving the body. I appreciate that. And of course, there are many religious, spiritual happenings, but it's like we're forced to make all these decisions and essentially, quote unquote, say goodbye within a week when we're just not comprehending life. And it just really made me think about how difficult that is when you're not even in your own body.
Yeah. And I think speaks to something that we've brought up multiple times in our podcast, this sense of because we don't have just a cultural, this is what happens. There are no decisions to make. You look at cultures where it's like, it's going to be a funeral pyre. And so we're going to do this and the whole community is going to come together and support you in this process. It's left to an individual and we don't have a nice answer for it because this is the culture we're in. But you're right. It is just like, why do we do this? Yeah.
Absolutely. It reminds me, we had a conversation with Adam Zuckerman, who started Buried at Work. And it's all about getting your paperwork in order so that all of the loose ends of your life, as many of them are taken care of as possible because they can be so consuming and they take so much brain space and you don't know what's going to begin to unravel until you're in it. And I asked him, I was like, isn't there some concierge? Like, isn't there someone who can do this for you? Because it's just so overwhelming. And he was like, because of the way those systems, like our financial systems are set up, you really have to do them yourself or have your executor of the will, which your executor of the will is going to be someone who is in the deep grief because it's going to be a partner or a child or a best friend. It's going to be someone within a very close-knit circle. And so the funeral reminds me of the same thing because it's like for my grandmother, for instance, she had it planned. She was 96. She had planned much of her funeral, not every detail. But my cousin, who died 10 days before her, was 40 years old and he did not. And so it's like, what might the industry do to help with those sudden losses that there was no planning, there was no conversation, and, releasing any shoulds, if there should have been or not, is here nor there, like it happens. And so how might the industry show up and say, in sudden losses, this is what we recommend. It's basic. It takes care of everything. If you have the brain and capacity or have someone who wants to think beyond this, you're welcome to. But this is what we've done to make this one thing that much easier. I don't know. It seems like a possible fix. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. And yeah, this is a hard moment.
It is. It is. All we can do is wrap each other in love.
Yes.
It's not about the words we say. It's just being there, sitting beside somebody, sitting in silence. That's really all somebody can even take at this stage.
Absolutely. That is a beautiful suggestion. So you talk about grief so beautifully, Christine, and the work that you do as a transformational coach, you have sort of rooted in how grief can be a point of transformation. It certainly was for me. I think at the point where my first really major loss of suddenly losing my father absolutely transformed my life, the way I saw myself, the way I saw the world, everything. And so we'd love for you just to talk about how did you come to that place of realization and integrating grief into your work?
It's such a good question. And honestly, it goes back to my teenage years, because that's when I recognized grief first. And not even necessarily grief due to end of life, but grief due to how I felt about my surroundings, how I felt as a teenager, how I felt in this world. I mean, I have been grieving almost my entire life and I can feel it. There's like this sense inside my soul, inside my body, in my chest that I can literally feel, and it's grief. And as I've gotten older, I have tried to talk about grief with people, but it's not a comfortable conversation for most of us. I mean, let's admit it. People don't like to talk about what is difficult, what is challenging, people that have passed on, pets that have passed on. It's just really uncomfortable. I mean, the truth of the matter is, and I know you have talked about it, is that we're just not raised to sit in the muck with other people when they are devastated. And I've always been comfortable in that space. So that's really what makes me realize how strongly I've identified with grief my entire life. But as I got older and started talking about it more, such as grief in the workplace, job loss, mentor loss, sudden employee death, identity loss. I mean, grief really is a very wide spectrum. And then you have end of life, which is a conversation in its own. But through life, I have lost family members either to long-term illness, old age. I've lost friends, death by suicide. You know, there's just been so many losses in my life. And I just realized really the beginning of this year how important it is to create more of a front and center conversation about it. And so I was talking about it more, but I wasn't gearing it into my coaching as much. I was, because there's always healing. There's always healing from our grief in coaching, no matter what. But it wasn't until I learned of a childhood friend who died by suicide. I learned about this in February, and he had died 5 years prior and nobody was talking about it. And so that was incredibly devastating to me, that this person who lived an important life. I don't care what you do in your career. You are an important person to somebody and to many people. And so it just wrecked my heart. And then a few months later, I suddenly and devastatingly lost one of our dogs, Maya Ray. And we don't have kids. They are our kids. I mean, 100%. I mean, if there is a beating heart out there that opens us up to love and accept love without any boundaries, it is animals. So it just devastated me. I have never felt grief in my life like I did when I lost Maya Ray. It's just been a completely separate journey. And in the beginning, I said, okay, I can't take any more clients right now because I can't handle it. You know, I was in the grief haze. I call it unconscious neglect. We don't know what's happening in our life. And I said, there's a huge lesson in this for me, and I need to understand what it is before I continue on. And I just paid so much attention to how people were showing up or not showing up, what I needed, what I was able to ask for and not able to ask for, how my heart one day might feel gratitude and the next day be shattered in pieces on the floor. And so with that, I pivoted my coaching. So instead of, you know, the rah-rah, live your best life, which really never just quite registered with me, I realized that I need to start with grief. And I want my clients to start with grief because we have so much unresolved grief in our lives and we don't realize it. And it's so important to recognize it, be permitted to feel it, not just in a 30-minute conversation, but in a lifetime. Because our hearts, we just learn how to cope with grief. We just learn how to live with it because no matter what, life goes on. That brokenness within us, it's alive and kicking all the time. But being able to recognize it, honor ourselves for it, and find those outlets that offer us support is so important that I knew that was what I needed to do. And I thank Maya Ray for it. I mean, of course, I'm devastated that I had to lose her to find this within myself, to pull it out of myself to help others. But essentially, that's how I got where I am today. And, you know, without all of this, I don't know how much better I would have been able to show up for my friends yesterday and will continue to, because there are those levels to grief. I thought I knew grief.
Yeah.
Rebecca and Andrea, I thought I knew grief. I was like, oh, trust me, I've been there. I've gone through it all. Nope. I mean, this is like in the movies, you know, crying on the floor, crying in the shower, driving through stop signs, having no concept of, again, the unconscious neglect that we just have no power in our brains over. So grief is one of those awful but treasured blessings that we can live through in our lives and offer gifts to other people.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, what I hear, and I've heard the phrase grief is a teacher, and I hear you being a student of it first. The fact that you knew to at least like, okay, I'm going to pause my work. I want to tap into something that feels more authentic. I want to be with my loss. I can't be available to be rah-rah live your best life. Like, I can't do that. I'd love to hear from you kind of when you're working with people, even like, what have you experienced? What do you see as sort of, we're not getting to the part where it has meaning yet. We're just being in the grief. What's kind of the experience you've had around timeline in that?
So I love that you asked that. And for timeline, of course, it's unique to each person based on their experience, their trauma. Because, I think no matter what, there's trauma in every death that happens, even if we know. Andrea, you've talked about losing your grandmother and your cousin. And just all those things that happen so close in time that no matter what, when that final breath is taken, there is trauma in loss. And so much of it is about meeting the griever where they are, but there has to at least be that point of their grieving process that they know there's a message. They know there are lessons that maybe they haven't quite picked up yet.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, it took me 6 weeks to accept that Maya had passed. All I kept thinking to myself was, and repeating in my mind is, I just want her back. I just want her back. And I know this is common. When something like this happens, we feel like we're betraying who we've lost by living our lives and moving on and making decisions that don't have to do with them anymore. It's like, this isn't supposed to be what it's like. Even though we have that realistic point of view that everybody dies, it's like, even today, I think to myself, well, I never thought I'd live a day in my life without her.
Yeah.
There's like that soul connection, that love that will never go away. And I think that's what creates that connectivity to thinking that we're never going to live a day without them. But at the 6-week mark, a friend had sent me a grief meditation that is geared around people and pets. And I think it's about 35 minutes long, and I could not sleep. Of course, I'm crying. I'm just in that grief haze, that operating out of, I don't even know what every day, because that's what you're supposed to do. And it was midnight, and Zoe, my other dog, she joined me on the sofa, and I plugged into this grief meditation. It's just beautiful. So he talks so much about the lessons that you learned from your person or your pet while they were here with you. And it's like, well, you know what? Now it goes even further. What is it now that you're able to receive that you couldn't recognize when they were living? What is it that they taught you? And at that point, I really felt isolated. I wasn't getting all the support that I was hoping for, at least that I needed, which is very common, especially with fur baby loss, because it's just a dog. You can get another one. It's the lack of identification of that love, which any grieving is always about that person. It's not about our opinion. It's not about what we've been through, right? But that's so common. And so I'm doing this meditation and feeling isolated, feeling really alone, thinking maybe I'm the one that invited people to not want to reach out. And just like that, it dawned on me. I was like, oh my God, Maya lived every moment of her life exactly the way she wanted to. So our dog, Zoe, she lives her life more around, what do you need? Nope, not Maya. Maya was like, I want this. I love this. I hate this. This makes me anxious. I don't want to eat this. I do want to eat this. There was never any misunderstandings about what Maya wanted. And I was like, oh my God, Maya was trying to teach me all along, not to wait for other people, not to think that I have to ask for anything, but it's more of, I need to do it my way, and not in a, go screw yourself kind of way, but in a, this feels right for me. And so in learning that, I realized the powerful impact of learning those lessons. And so in working with my clients, making sure they're at that point in their grieving process that they want to learn more. It's not about moving on. It's about, I just want to receive as much as I can from who I've lost or these experiences I've been through. And I need guidance. I'm not able to see them on my own because I'm clouded by my grief. I'm clouded by wanting them back or, these things, because those messages, those lessons are so huge. And those are the lessons that really create a transformation that stamps their memory in your heart forever. Now you're able to support other people. You're able to create a purpose in your life that maybe you didn't have before, that is stamped in love in the person that you lost or the fur baby that you lost.
Yeah, what I love is just the attunement of sort of every person is different and honoring the process and the length of time for each person. Marissa Renee Lee in her book, Grief is Love, has a chapter called Legacy. And it reminds me of what she talks about in Legacy, this exploration of like how you're carrying the legacy forward, how you're carrying something that they taught you. They might not have even been trying to teach you, in the case of humans who have all these intentions. And it's like, if I leave, I want my legacy to be blah, blah, blah. Well, your legacy is what your legacy is. It's based on people's experience of you. But there's a way that we can kind of honor that and fold that into who we are. And it's a way of like continuing to walk with the love instead of move beyond it, which is a completely different framework. So yeah, you answered the question beautifully.
Oh, I love when I answer it beautifully.
So I think the other thing that you've mentioned, your transformative grief was the loss of your dog. And it's so interesting because our pets, particularly in American culture, are part of our family. If you look at like the amount of money that we spend on our pets, and my dog, I cook for her, like she has got a good life, this girl. And yet there is this reaction when a pet dies that it's just sort of done. You just get another one and you really don't talk about it. I feel so touched. A best friend of mine, her cat, we knew it was time to put her cat to sleep. And she called me and said, Andrea, will you go with me? And I was like, I will drop everything. Of course I will. And we sat there and went through it together. And we sat in my car until she was ready to go inside. We just took it so slowly. And for weeks after, and then, sort of months, when the memory of her cat would come up, she knew she could reach out to me. But that's not a common experience. And so I just want to talk about a little bit about this particular loss that so many of us have. I have had pets my whole life, and I know now how I metabolize their loss. But if it hadn't been for like guidance when I was younger about how to move through these tragic losses and open my heart to new animals, I'm not sure how I would have managed it. My first loss of one of my really dear pets was when I was in high school. So let's just talk a little bit about the experience of pet loss and, how it's totally okay to have a dog that is your child, but then it's like not seen as okay to grieve them like your child or a family member.
Yeah, I think that even people that do have fur babies in their family, every connection, right? Even between humans, every connection is different. And I also feel that through the last 10 years, I feel like there's been this huge evolution of how we love and care for our pets. So we've always loved them and cared for them, but now they're really family members. They're our daughters. They're dog-ters, right? Whatever you want to call them. And something that really came up for me that I love to use this kind of analogy, if you will, comparison, so when humans raise kids, right, there's a certain period that maybe you can have a short refrigerator in your house, or you have one of the cabinets that has their snacks in it, or, a little plastic bowl where they can make themselves cereal or something where they can begin to help themselves with something, right? It's like you're on a call, hey, go get your snack. It's in the kid cabinet or whatever it's called. That never happens with animals. We are 24/7 responsible for really what they feel, what they need, what they want, what's happening with them. We're never able to transition like we are with humans. So where's your pain? There's never any of that. It is a constant need to try to figure out through connection, through love, what is going on with our pet. So that connection, and believe me, I'm not comparing, because love is love, no matter where it comes from, no matter where it stems from. I'm absolutely not a believer in comparing grief on any measure whatsoever. So it's understanding, I think, the difference in how we connect and care and love and have to be responsible for our pets that creates that bond that a lot of people don't understand unless they've done it, unless they've really been through it. Like even my mom, we had a dog when we were young, but she was not connected to it. And I wrote a book. I co-authored a book. She's reading it. It's a very touching story. So listeners, the two of you, when you read it, have tissues nearby. It's very, very touching. It's sad, but it's also beautiful. And she said, Teen, I had to stop reading it. I was getting too upset. She said, but then I'm thinking, but it's just a dog. And of course, my heart, just dropped thinking that, because I'm thinking it's not about how you feel. It's about how I feel. If we can disconnect our own feelings about how somebody else is grieving, whether it's an animal or a human or whatever, losing a job. I mean, again, I know that's different, but that loss is felt by that individual. And so that's where I try to parallel grief with any other grief, no matter where it's originated from. But there is just something with pets that creates this bond. Every day you're with them. So I've worked from home for 18 years. And so every single part of my routine, every single day, every minute is it time to take the dogs out? And, come in, they rest. I need to make sure I have the front door open so they can guard the house and watch the people drive by and, carry on with that role. It's like every morning, feed them breakfast. And then it's like, okay, before lunch, time to go out again. I mean, like there's this routine in our minds that we don't maybe typically have with humans because again, we are responsible for their every step, for everything. So pet loss, I mean, I think if we could just appreciate, there just might be something really unique about the bond between pets and their humans that if we're not honoring it, we're missing an opportunity to appreciate how big love really is. We're shutting ourselves out from that.
Yeah. Some of what you're saying, I feel like there's something so important to talk about that you're in a space where they depend on you and you are the one keeping them safe and taking care of them daily. So there's like this protective quality that, yes, it's different as when we have children and they're growing and we're like, have some independence or, oh my gosh, I have to deal with my anxiety, letting you go out on your own. I hope you know how to protect and take care of yourself, but like we're leaving that role. And so that role is constantly shifting and it doesn't shift with a pet. I think about my first dog and when it was time to make a decision about whether we were going to put her to sleep or not, and just looking at her little face, looking at me, it was like, I've been the one keeping her alive in so many ways. And now I have to make the decision of when her life's going to end. And I didn't want to. And I was sort of arguing with the vet. If we were in the wild, she would just die naturally when she was ready. And she's like, yeah, and she's not in the wild and she's suffering. And so it was really having to make one of the hardest decisions that, I had to make in my life. And so I hear what you're wanting to honor. And I just wanted to like put these other words to it, that it's just like being that's so dependent on you and that it's a daily investment in relationship. It's an enormous loss. And there was something when you said, which is so common, this is not to like be hard on your mom, but that it's such a common thought, like, oh, it's just a pet, that I think speaks to even kind of a bigger piece of our relationship to the natural world. And that we cutting down a tree, oh, it's just a tree. Why is someone fighting for this tree? That we kind of have a way of saying, we're the humans, this is up here, and then everything is just whatever. I recently went to a talk, Cy Montgomery, who wrote How to Be a Good Creature. And she was talking about this relationship she had with an octopus, that she had this relationship with her. And at the point that the octopus is dying, she went to visit her and the octopus comes up, wraps her tentacles around Cy's arms and looks her in the eye. And she said, I might cry. I don't know what she felt in her 3 hearts, but I know what I felt in mine. And that feels like another piece of what you're sharing, which is your love and your loss and what you feel is valid, no matter what anyone else's opinion. There can be no shoulds in this.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that too, Rebecca. I've had so many pets in my life. Sort of the first one for me was a cat that was sort of mine. She was my cat. I picked her out and I remember she was sick. She was very clearly sick. And my dad came to me and was like, Andrea, you need to be the one to make this decision. I was 16. And he was like, I will honor whatever you want, but she's sick. And so, we need to make a decision and I'm not going to make it for you. I'm not going to force you to do anything. And when you were talking about driving through stop signs, I was so angry at my dad. And he was being very kind. But I was so angry because I just didn't want to have to make that decision. And I jumped in the car and I drove to school with a flat tire. And my dad, my wonderful dad, showed up, changed the car tire in the parking lot of high school, so that I could drive home not on a flat tire. And then she actually disappeared. And she went away and then she came back and she looked really, really much sicker. And I just knew, I was like, oh, okay, it's time for me to make the decision. And I sat with her and cried and I told her it was okay. And she actually passed away at home that night. But it was that also my dad giving me, empowering me with, this is your connection. You know, we all had a connection to her, but it's your deepest connection. And so you get to be the one to make this decision. Here's my thoughts and opinions, and you get to be the one. And I carried that with me with every pet that I had, and have had a lot of different kinds of deaths with my animals, each one tender, each one, I don't know how it happened, but every dog I've had is the very best dog that ever existed. I've been so lucky. You know, so each death also has been so unique and tender. And then watching with our last dog, Annabelle Lee Mashushi Rainbow Sunshine Puppy Love, who passed away while we were on vacation. And I'm so grateful for everyone who like FaceTimed me and, you know, but we were like in this COVID health clinic getting our COVID tests. And my husband's like, I can't deal with it. It was his first dog. I got her about 7 months before we met. And he was like, I cannot do this. And like our sons. And so it was like also watching how they all managed the grief of losing for them their first dog. You know, I had sadly lost 3 already in my life, but that was also another layer of managing the loss of her, plus helping my kids and watching my husband lose his very first dog. And it was so tender. And I don't think we honored it well. I mean, we did and we didn't in so many ways. Because I think the boys and I were like, we've moved through it and now we're ready for a new dog. And my husband was in this space of like, I can never love another dog again. Like, what's wrong with you? How could you betray this dog? You know, she was the very best dog that ever existed. So, you know, it was such a unique space because everybody had their own connection to her. And my boys really feel like they have a connection to her in the afterlife. And they wanted a dog that was physically in this world too. And I learned through loss and connection with pet that every dog I got actually opened my heart bigger and bigger versus like taking any love away from my previous dog. But we needed to give my husband the space to kind of come to that place. And I think we still did it faster than he would have liked. And it took him about a year to fall madly in love with Banana. But, you know, it's just that connection. Yeah, it's so different for each person.
I couldn't agree more. And, you know, it's interesting, of course, with our fur babies, most people say, oh, well, the fur baby was more connected to, you know, my partner versus me. And I mean, and Maya kind of was. She loved to follow my partner around, but we also kind of just seemed to have one of those families where unless it was the 4 of us together all the time, so me, my partner, Maya, and Zoe, then there was a disconnect. It's like Maya would want to go outside and maybe she would go out with my partner. And then she's like, but where are the other 2? There's favoritism, but still it's like the pack needs to stay together. Otherwise, I don't feel right. And Maya was such a unifying factor for our family that I never realized. I mean, I had 2 Shelties. Now I have 1. They're herding dogs. So they're always trying to bring everybody together. And so at night in particular, Maya wanted everybody in the TV room after dinner. And heaven forbid if you were the one cleaning up the dishes, because all she would do is whine at you and poke at you and poke at you and poke at you and be like, get in the TV room. Like, this is time for us to be together. And then you're going to play with me. I mean, Maya never gave you rest. She's just one of those dogs. I mean, it was like she required constant attention. My life has changed dramatically since she's been gone because she was everything. It's like our poor Zoe, I know, you know, kind of took a back seat because Maya was just one of those dogs. But again, she always told us what she wanted and what she didn't want. And there's just something about that that creates that connection that was all 4 of us, despite, you know, some of the favoritism that has created this. We will always feel it regardless of the other animals that we bring into our home. There was just something extra, extra special about Maya Ray. And she was sick a lot of her life. You know, I mean, I homemade half of their food every 2 weeks. There I was in the kitchen, you know, spending 2 hours making dog food and, you know, so much attention to her life, which I think kind of created even more struggle with my healing, with the grief, because there you are nurturing a dog who was healthy but sick. I mean, she lived 8 years and almost 3 months. But then there's that attachment in, I always need to take care of you. I always need to worry about you, which I did. And then nothing. We even experience that with humans. You know, we become caretakers to our partners or parents that are sick or, you know, children that are sick. And there's this special love that comes through in being a caregiver like that. And so then when that person is gone, part of that identity is gone. Now you're grieving who you were to that beating heart. How do you channel that today? And again, human or fur baby. It's the same loss. It's the same practice of trying to grieve and mend that pain.
Yeah. I mean, there's such a void. It's not just the loss of this being, it's the loss of a whole way of being. So there's so many kind of micro losses within this loss.
Yeah. And then our dog, Zoe, has been grieving. So that's another really important thing for us to recognize is that our pets grieve the pets that have passed away. And I think it was like for 6 weeks, almost every night, Zoe would come into the bedroom. So our dogs have full, run of the house. It doesn't matter to us. They could sleep on the sofa, they sleep on bed. And I love that. And Zoe would come into the bedroom about 3 a.m. and whine. And I'm like, oh, does she need to go outside? Let me get up. And we'll walk into the hallway and she just stands there and stares at me. So I'm like, what's going on? So I walk her to the back door, see if she wants to go out. She doesn't. And I noticed it took me the third evening. I said, oh my God, Zoe had a ritual. She had a ritual that around this time every night, she'd go searching for Maya. Oh, there you are, Maya. Okay, I see you. And then Zoe would go sleep. And now she's coming to me and saying, it's like I could get choked up saying this every time. I'm looking for Maya. I look for her every night and I can't find her. I don't know what to do. And I'm sad. And it was so heartbreaking. Of course, I'd scoop her up, bring her back to bed with me and have her lay beside me. And, there were so many things that she exhibited, like Zoe lost weight. And we were feeding her more because we were trying to be more active with her. She was losing weight. She was sleeping all the time. She wasn't barking. Shelties bark a lot. She wasn't barking that much. She was asking me to just hold her, which is very uncharacteristic for Zoe. And so honoring what our pets go through is so important because they experience trauma too. They have feelings. So that was really heartbreaking, but also beautiful to guide her through, to care her way through that.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a touching story. I also think about our pet's intuition. We had a cat who passed about a year after our dog, sadly. But I think Penelope Hufflepuff knew that Annabelle was sick. So Penelope started to exhibit things that were really unusual, like peeing in places that were not. And we never had this issue. She was like, a 9-year-old cat. Like she knew what to do. And when, surprising to us, Annabelle died really suddenly, it made so much sense. And I told my husband, I said, I think Penelope knew. I think she knew that Annabelle was sick and was trying to tell us, which was also like touching and heartbreaking. So just those signs that our other animals in the house can give us when they have connections between each other that we can be so unaware of how deep they are.
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting. So Maya died of congestive heart failure and we didn't know. I mean, that whole story, I can touch on it briefly, but that morning when I took Maya to the vet beforehand, Zoe was smelling her mouth a lot. So Maya was having a hard time breathing. And of course, any dog, but especially Shelties, they have a long snout, which means they can smell that much more intensely. And I think she smelled something. I remember I was like, why does she keep smelling Maya? But not really registering it. And it's just, they connect in a way that real time there's no way for us to recognize it. They're so in tune with each other, just as you mentioned, Andrea, that we don't realize. Later, when I came home from the vet after Maya had passed, they were putting her in my arms to go to an overnight vet so she could get overnight care because we were thinking that whatever it was that she had could be treated. And it was seconds upon being put in my arms that she passed away. So it was an absolute extreme shock to me, completely devastated. And when I came home, then my partner came home, Zoe's like, all right, well, you left really quickly this morning and you took my sister. Where is she now? Because Zoe's one of those caretakers. Again, she reacts to what's going on. And it was just heartbreaking. It's just a loss that is felt far and wide. And I just really do hope that, in speaking about this and writing about it, that we can have more compassion, not only for those that are grieving, but also for those that have lost their fur babies, because that's just a wound that's really hard to ever seal up.
Yeah, it is. And we're so grateful for you bringing the conversation and just being so open about that experience and that deep love that you have for your fur babies and the profound loss, that sudden, so sudden, departure of Maya Ray right in your arms. Like just that is profound.
the two of you're really going to identify with this. So when I would tell the story, so I made the announcement so many days later on Facebook or LinkedIn, and people would say, "Oh, that's so beautiful that she passed away in your arms. That's so wonderful." And of course, I wouldn't want her to pass away anywhere else, but they didn't know that her head went against gravity. Things that we don't do, her body did in that last breath, right? Like that it was completely unexpected. And so there's that part about understanding all of the grief story and not, we want to automatically connect the positive to it. Oh, that's beautiful. She passed away in your arms. That's so wonderful. It's like, you have no idea how difficult it is for me to get that image out of my mind. And so creating, instead of painting our own picture about how beautiful and peaceful and okay we want it to be, check in with the griever. Tell me what happened.
Yeah. Like you're saying, in that moment of a loss, it's a trauma. I mean, and certainly you weren't expecting it. So it's such a disconnect, or like a record scratch, to have someone be like, "Oh, what a beautiful moment you had." And it's like, you didn't even ask. It actually wasn't. There was a lot in that. And so, yeah, I appreciate you naming that, because I mean, it happens, I think, and you're right, in all sort of loss scenarios, or where we have this habitual like projection of our own stuff or what we think people might want to hear.
Or a romanticism of those final moments. And, it's like this movie.
It's the not saying like, well, at least you got the time you got, or at least, it's that.
Yes. I have to tell you guys this. So I think it was 8 weeks after Maya had passed, and I'd been following you on Instagram for quite a while. And, I meant to look it up. You essentially posted a post from somebody else that talked about how just because our hearts stop beating, it doesn't mean the chemistry in our brain has stopped flowing. I mean, when I heard that, I felt like my nerves just stopped. Like I felt my muscles deplete. And I thought, oh my God, I don't want to know the truth on whether that's only for humans or, that it's not pets, because I'm just going to go ahead and say it also is for pets, because I had 30 minutes alone with Maya before my partner came, which of course I was crying and devastated. But I thought, you know what? I'm going to hold on to that. She heard everything I said, that she didn't think I left her at the vet, because of course that just, every time I think about it, I just crumble. I didn't leave you. I've been here with you. I love you so much. I didn't know you were sick. Like all these things that we want to be able to say. When you posted that, and I've been wanting to thank you, and I've been sharing this in various channels, that's really important. It's so incredibly important. And I know, Andrea, you sat with your grandmother for quite a while after she passed, and how beautiful that must have been for you to even know that connection, that aliveness, that awareness of you being there. I can't tell you what it's done for me. I really want to thank you.
Oh my gosh, you got me. Woo! I remember that. And I remember you replying. And, I think I'm so glad it was healing for you. It was healing for me too, because people thought it was so weird that I stayed with my grandmother. And I was like, what did you think I was going to do? Leave her, I think even my family members, they would check in with me. I mean, I stayed with her hours and hours. They were like, you're still there? I'm like, what?
Where else would I be?
Right.
Where else would I be? And so it's so beautiful that I think in particular, my experience with my pets passing, vets have been so tender-hearted in giving that space and time. They support the passing, and then they leave you alone to be with your pet. And I've never felt rushed out of that room. It has been nothing but just a tender-hearted space. And so I'm so glad that you felt that in your heart and that you had that time, because I agree. I mean, I think I always felt like spiritually that person was, or that pet was still there, but to know there was also still a physiological them there was just heart opening for me. So I'm so glad that helped you. And I remember that post, and I remember your reply very well.
It was absolutely beautiful. And there was maybe 30 seconds that I felt peace. So my partner, again, we didn't know that she was dying. So I was with Maya alone. And so it took her 30 minutes to get there. But I had about 30 seconds of peace that I thought, she's hearing me, like she's with me, like she's risen above me right now, like she knows I'm here. And then, of course, the sobbing began again because I was in absolute shock. And we stayed with her for 2 hours. I mean, it was 2 hours from her passing, and I still wasn't ready to leave. But that's that part of like really recognizing what we need to do in those moments, not feeling pressure from other people. It's like, I need to be here. I need to do this. And because there's so much in our own instincts and in our heart that lead us. And I just hope that given those situations, that whoever you are, that you have enough to say, this is what I need right now. There's nothing worse than when somebody has passed, a pet has passed, and you didn't get to have those moments that you needed, because they do matter. They matter significantly.
Yeah. So, Christine, I know you penned this book for pets and co-penned this book with other fur parents called My Fur Baby Wrote This Book. And tell us a little bit about that process and what it was like to start to get that down on paper.
Thank you so much for asking. It's been a very emotional several weeks. So the book was released October 7th, which is just a few weeks ago. And so I had written an article, which I know I had sent to the two of you, and really writing about my feelings about pet loss, the connection with our pets and our fur babies, and just how devastating it was. And so that was part of the introduction or the invitation to co-author this book. And the book comes from the perspective of 4 other authors, where some of them write from the pet's perspective, right? So the story is told, of course, penned by the human, but from the pet's perspective, where I told from my perspective and my story about Maya. So it wasn't unfamiliar for me to write about it, right? It was a slightly different angle than the article I wrote. But as we were going through the editing and the co-authors, because it's an intimate group, which is really nice, as we were meeting and spending all this time together, I noticed I just started really getting heavy with emotions, because this wasn't me publishing my own article on medium.com or writing a post on LinkedIn or Instagram. This was going to be a book. This was going to be a book in print or on Kindle that people from all over the world could read, and my name would be attached to it. It's the very first book I've ever co-authored or authored. And so I really started thinking about it. And when the book released, I was overwhelmed with emotion, because all I've wanted is to create a legacy, just as we spoke about earlier, that you talked about, Rebecca, earlier, the legacy of that person, that beating heart that is no longer with us. And I realized that I had done that, and that she's already permanently markered in my life and in our family's life. I mean, we're going this weekend to spread some of her ashes up at our family cabin, which is, of course, it's going to be absolutely devastating. I mean, in so many days, I'm going to be drenched in tears, but gratitude as well. And this book, I mean, I write from the heart. You're going to cry. If you read this book, you're going to cry, but you're going to cry because you feel the love. And that was what I wanted. I want people to understand and to just for maybe a few minutes respect the love, no matter where people have it or who they have it with in their lives. And I don't know, it's changed my grieving process. Like I almost felt like I went backwards, but that's grief, right? We take a step forward and then we go backwards, and then we don't know who we are. And then we're like, oh my gosh, I'm devastated. How is life ever going to be the same? Which it won't. And it just has created this really beautiful opportunity to take Maya Ray's name, Maya Ray, and just make it permanent. And that feels right.
Oh, that's beautiful.
That's beautiful. Well, it's on my Kindle right now.
I love that. Oh my gosh, you have to message me afterwards and tell me how long you cried.
I will. I'm a long crier.
And it's so important. I mean, also just want to highlight the piece where you were saying your mom was like, it made me cry. I couldn't, it's my work in this life with my mother has been like, and let yourself cry and let yourself cry. And she's finally like, oh, it's actually so important. And now I realize like, in allowing my grief to really be here, I actually feel like I have more life force, and so sometimes you have to kind of help people see that I never want to be like, cry so you'll feel good. But it's like, it actually is such an important part of letting yourself feel all of your emotions so that you can feel the fullness and the richness of every single emotion. Because when you're pushing away, I don't want to cry, your joy gets tamped down too, and your love gets tamped down. So it's just letting yourself also have your heart broken open in these stories. So it's such an offering to like share your heart completely and be like, I trust you'll be okay when you cry your eyes out at my story, because you should. And we could all just learn to be better at like holding that space for ourselves. And anytime anyone's like, I'm sorry, I'm crying, I'm like, if I could just make everyone stop saying that.
Yes, that's right. We're allowed to have emotions. We're human beings. My goodness.
Right. Totally. Thank you for what you're doing, like what you've written about, and the work you do with people that feels like such a shift in the conversation around what coaching can be, where it's like your full self and not just the cheerleader part. You can invite grief into a coaching conversation. That's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think so too. And, really, grief it's just everywhere. Let's just not deny it anymore. Let's make it okay. Let's take away the stigma. It's a real word. It's attached to real love. Grief is love. That's it. Thank you so much for inviting me into your universe and just the beauty that you offer. And I'm learning so much through you. And that's how we get better, isn't it?
That's the goal, to keep getting better. I love that. Well, we are so glad to have you in our universe. And it has been such a heart-opening conversation. Thank you for showing up in your grief today, helping to just preserve the memory of both Maya Ray and Bailey. And so our hearts are with you and with everyone.
Yeah, so as we wrap up this episode, as we always do, we just check in with how we've been touching into our grief this week. So we'll start with you, Christine. How are you touching into your grief this week?
Oh my gosh. Honestly, I had been touching into it so much since my book release that it was just almost a little bit, actually a lot, exhausting and overwhelming. And so I think I have found, until yesterday when I found out about Bailey, but I think I had leveled at least for so many days in just finding gratitude with the opportunity to create a legacy for Maya, to join the two of you here today. Without grief, I wouldn't be here. And so I think I've really honored it in a way that I need to respect it, because denying it doesn't get me anywhere, but respecting it creates even more love. And that's all I want.
Oh, that was so beautiful. What a beautiful share. And I'll carry so much of that with me, respecting my grief. Absolutely. I'm in a weird place with my grief right now. It feels very alive and multifaceted. I remain in this October season of loss 1 year ago and go to bed and have flashes of my grandmother or hear my cousin's voice all of a sudden. And that part has been a little unexpected and overwhelming. I don't know why I wouldn't have expected that at a year I wouldn't have these sort of like flare-ups. I think I thought I dealt with those losses really well. Having become a grief expert in all things. And I think it's just been a reality check of how tender loss is and how prolonged grief can be and how it shows up in unexpected moments. And my brain is just like letting these moments through, particularly around my grandmother and my cousin right now. So it's been surprising. Grief has sort of just flared up for me this past week, and I'm just trying to sit with it and remember them with my full heart. And we're also preparing for what we celebrate in our house, Dia de Muertos, where we build our ofrenda to our past ancestors and our past pets. And I've been having a hard time pulling it together. And I think it's because the grief feels so tender. So it's been a hard week for me around my grief.
Thank you, Andrea.
Rebecca, how have you been touching into your grief this week?
I mean, the grief that has been most present this week. Yesterday was the death anniversary of my friend Sandra. She was the one that was on our holiday grief episode, but it was when she lost her stepson to suicide. And so she's been posting a lot about it, and just remembering that day so many years ago when she called, and the feeling of like holding what she was in and having this feeling in myself of like, this can't be happening. And this thing where you want like, oh, that's wrong. They called you and they made a mistake. And then sort of that taking me back to when my dad died and feeling like, oh, you said he died, but wait a minute, just wait, because it could be different news and maybe we're wrong. And so there's a way that those memories are kind of cracking my heart a little bit this week, and just being with the grief and not the like, I know they're okay. And I know that they've found a way to honor his memory and done all these beautiful things, like a legacy of him. It's like, that's not important right now. What's important is is like my heart is back in this many years ago when it happened, and it just feels broken open again. And sort of what like Christine was talking about, this feeling of, oh, there's the grief again. And so I'm in it, and just honoring that. Yeah. Respecting that this is part of the process of being human, alive, and trying to wrap our hearts around things that don't make any sense.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both. May we all honor and respect our grief.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Much love to both of you and all of our listeners.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of All the Grief. You can find us on Instagram at All the Grief Pod. And please take a moment to rate our podcast and share us with your friends. We'd love to keep expanding our reach to all the people who could benefit from conversations on grief. Take care.